I remember I was just 5 years old, and it was my first day at school. I had been delayed a bit because I had an illness for a couple of weeks, so it was into the beginning of the October 1940. And the first thing that I remember, or don't remember in a way, or nearly didn't remember, because my school was bombed, and tragically 4 children were killed, and they were all evacuees that ironically my father had just brought into the town, and they'd come in, not from London, but I think from Colchester. And so it was not a good start to school life, in the sense that I nearly didn't make it beyond it.
I was born in 1937 in Northampton. My father worked in a building department, but when the war broke out, he was 35 years of age, so quite old to go into the army. However, he volunteered to go into the army when he was 35, 1941. He left behind his wife, me, my baby brother, 2 evacuees, and his mother-in-law. So my mother had a lot to do during the war. He was away for 4.5 years, and we never saw him again until he was demobilised. He was in the 8th Army, in the British Army, the 8th Army. He went through Northern Africa against Rommel's army, which was a bitter fight for 2 or 3 years. And then his brigade went over to Sicily and up to Italy. And they were joined by the Americans in Italy, and it was a bitter fight, and there were thousands of British and American soldiers killed.
My dad was in the Royal Warwickshires, and when he went over on D-Day, I was just over 1. And shortly after that, he was hospitalised, and during the time he was hospitalised, he made me a purse, which, being a little tiny child, I lost. And I was very distressed, apparently, and my mum put an advert in the Chronicle and Echo. And one day I was coming back, I was nearly 2 by this time. I was coming back from town with my grandmother. We opened the front door, and there, lying on the mat, was my purse. And I was so excited and so pleased. And this is the memory I actually can recall. I can recall this as though it was yesterday. I went outside and I waited for my mum to come round the corner, pushing my baby sister. And I ran up the street saying, "My daddy's purse has come home, my daddy's purse is back." And I've still got it to this day.
My mother and father were married in 1939, and my father was called up in April 1940. And he had to give up a post teaching in Lincolnshire as headmaster at Fleet Fen. And so my memories are based on the book that my mother had compiled from letters that he wrote to her while he was abroad. And he does betray a sense of humour in his letters. In particular, he remembers a scorpion spider called Claude, who was the enemy of scorpions and things. He made a pet of this scorpion spider, but until he noticed that it was beginning to sort of walk over his mosquito net at night and look at him and have baleful sort of glances at him. So in the end, to sort of draw a veil over exactly what happened, but it was a brand new, flat heel of a brand new army ammunition boot that was applied with some force, and Claude was no more, and he was a lonely bloke after that, as he said in his letter.
My stepbrother's brother, Ken Astles, initially served in Iceland at the beginning of the war. Very few people even aware that troops were in Iceland. But then approaching D-Day, he was transferred, obviously, with the landing forces. But shortly after D-Day, 16 days later, on the 26th of June, then he died in action. Step Gran, to whom the telegram was addressed, it's not just a piece of paper of that size, and it just states, "Deeply regret to inform you of recently received Northwest Europe, that Lieutenant K.J.H. Astor's Royal Artillery was killed in action on the 26th of June, 1944. The Army Council desire to offer you their sincere sympathies, Under Secretary of State for War." The initial graves were simple wooden crosses. They were looked after later by the people of Normandy, who offered to help anyone who had lost anyone during the landings, that they would care for the graves and communicate with their loved ones.
And then one day in 1941, my brother came home in the evening and told us at the dinner table that he'd volunteered for aircrew in the Royal Air Force. My father was so upset, he went really berserk and told him, because the losses in the Air Force was huge as it continued throughout the war. So shortly afterwards he was called up and he was trained as a rear gunner in a twin-engined Wellington bomber, which was a vintage MiG-30s aircraft. And in Christmas 1942 completed his training and flew to Gibraltar, Malta, and then North Africa. He was shot down at one point and behind enemy lines, and he walked back. The crew crashed in the desert, and he walked back through the lines and returned very late to his squadron, and was made a member of the Late Arrivals Club for such crews who did that. So he became involved in the Italian campaign, and in July 1943, he took off at midnight from Malta to bomb the docks at Naples, and nothing more was heard of his aircraft. We don't know what happened to him still, and we believe he is at the bottom of the Mediterranean somewhere. None of the crew survived, the crew of 5, and that was the start really of our downhill journey in the war as a family, because we were very happy up to that point. And my father took it really badly, and of course my mother did. I was very close to my mother, as it was me and Mum through most of the war, with the other children being older. And it was a sort of downhill journey then to the end of the war, and none of the family got over it. It still upsets me to talk about it today. And then just finally, my mother then got cancer, and she died on New Year's Day 1946. So we ended the war as a family in total disarray, and it took me many years to get over.
My father, he saw the poster, "Our Country Needs You," and decided to join up. He joined in the Northamptonshire Regiment and was posted to India, where he used to train the Indian cadets and with rifles and what have you, and also the soldiers. So he trained rather than fought in the Indian Army. And Anyway, he got married out there in India and had 3 children, me being one of them. And when the war, at the end of the war in 1947, he was sent back to London, where London, as my mum, this is all from my mum, was starving. You couldn't get food, everything was on rationing. So after being in India, where everything was flowing, you know, you had everything you wanted, he came to London, freezing, no food, no clothes. But it brought out the best in people. My mother said she'd never had such kindness, and she was 21 with 3 young girls. And people who were elderly with their coupons used to come up and give my mum their coupons for the children's sweets, because you could only get 1 packet for the whole week. You couldn't get much food.
Well, firstly, I'd like to talk about the 2 older brothers who were boys during the war, and one of them had a stammer, and the other one was deaf in 1 ear. And I always wondered why this was, but then I was told that during the war that the Germans targeted Clyde Bank. They were building shipyards were there, and they were bombing them on a regular basis. And my brothers lived in Glasgow, and they had to go to the Anderson shelter, which is a metal framed thing you would go to be safe. But they could still hear the noise of the bombing, and this is how it affected both of them. One of them had a stammer all his life, and the other one was deaf in 1 ear. My father was John Mercer, and he was a serving soldier in the Second World War in the HLI. The HLI is a Highland Light Infantry, but the word Highland, really, because most of them came from the Glasgow area, which is not the Highlands, but it was the Highland Light Infantry. And he was an ordinary soldier, but he was a driver, and he drove the troop carriers, the soldiers in the trucks. So they were in Germany, and they were in a convoy travelling along to destination, and they were stopped at a roadblock like this, and diversion, but they were diverted into a field, the whole convoy. And all of a sudden they were surrounded by German troops with submachine guns, who told them in no uncertain manner that they were now prisoners of war. And this has been reacted many times in films, I think, that you've seen that in films where they dress up as, these were German soldiers in British uniforms, and I've since seen that in movies. So they were taken to a prisoner of war camp in Germany, where they were they weren't treated well. So, but my dad kept a diary. The day-to-day things that were happening in the camp. He had a little teeny pencil, he said. He found a book. And so every night he would bury this little diary in the ground in the tin. So unfortunately, due to the excitement and the turmoil of the liberation of the camp, he left the camp without retrieving the tin. And I've often wondered what information was in that little tin, what it would have revealed. But maybe it's better for it to remain where it is.